The hum of the server room was a familiar lullaby, a sound Imani had learned to associate with the steady, predictable rhythm of her life. It was a good life. A quiet one. She was the executive secretary to the vice president of acquisitions at Kenkyo Tech, one of the largest firms in Tokyo. At 23, she had an apartment in a decent neighborhood, a career path, and a carefully constructed wall between her professional life and her private one. That wall was about to be obliterated. The door to the conference room clicked shut behind her, the sound as final as a gavel. On one side of the polished mahogany table sat Mr. Davies, her boss, his face a mask of corporate disappointment. Beside him, an unfamiliar woman from human resources with sharp eyes and a sharper suit. Across from them, looking entirely too pleased with himself, was Ren Tanaka, a junior analyst who had been gunning for a promotion with the subtlety of a freight train. "Imani," Mr. Davies began, steepling his fingers. "We have a serious problem." She kept her posture straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Inside, a cold knot of dread was tightening in her stomach. "I'm sure we can resolve it, sir." The HR woman slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a series of emails, encrypted data packets, and bank transfer receipts. All of them sent from Imani's encrypted work account. All of them directed to Kenkyo Tech's biggest competitor. The transfers were substantial, 6 figures each. It was corporate espionage, blatant and catastrophic. And it had her digital fingerprints all over it. "I don't understand," she said, her voice steady despite the floor dropping out from under her. "I didn't do this." "The logs are irrefutable," Ren said, his voice laced with false sympathy. "The IP address traces back to your workstation, and the biometric login was confirmed with your credentials. We double-checked. He had done this. He had to have. He was the only one who knew her passwords, the ones she'd foolishly shared when he'd offered to help with a system update last month. He'd been so helpful, so eager. A snake." "This is a mistake," she insisted, looking at Mr. Davies. She had worked for him for 2 years. He had praised her efficiency, her discretion. He had to know her. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "The company has to protect itself, Imani. Given the severity of the breach, we're terminating your employment effective immediately. You'll be escorted from the building. We're considering our legal options." That was it. 2 years of loyalty, of late nights and meticulous work, erased in 2 minutes by a man who couldn't even look at her. The HR woman made a small, clinical gesture, and 2 security guards entered the room. They were large men, impassive and broad. They moved like the room owed them space. Humiliation burned hotter than anger. They watched her as she packed the few personal items from her desk into a small cardboard box. A framed photo, a favorite pen, a small succulent she'd managed to keep alive. Colleagues she'd shared lunches and jokes with just that morning now stared at their screens, refusing to look up. Ren stood by the elevators, a silent, smug sentinel. As she was walked through the gleaming lobby, her deactivated access card slapped onto the security desk, the cold reality set in. She was fired. She was framed. And she was utterly, terrifyingly alone in a city that was not her own. Outside, the Tokyo afternoon was a riot of noise and light. The crowds of Shinjuku swept past her, a river of humanity that had no idea she was drowning. She walked for blocks, the box clutched to her chest, the city blurring through a film of unshed tears. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not for them. She found herself in a small, quiet park tucked between 2 skyscrapers. She sank onto a bench, the box beside her a pathetic monument to her ruined life. They had taken everything. Her job, her reputation, her future. They thought they had won. They thought she was just a secretary, a foreign girl with no one to turn to. They were wrong. Her hand trembled as she pulled her personal phone from her purse. It was a sleek, burner-style device, one he had given her. She scrolled to the single contact saved in its memory. A name with no photo, no information. Just a name. Tatsuya. Her husband. The marriage was a secret kept under lock and key, a collision of worlds so disparate she could barely reconcile them herself. They had met 6 months ago, a chance encounter in a quiet jazz bar in Ginza. He was all quiet intensity and bespoke suits that fit his shoulders like armor. He moved with a stillness that commanded attention more than any shout ever could. He was a man carved from shadow and steel. She learned later what he was. The head of the Kudokai, one of the most powerful Yakuza clans in Tokyo. An empire built on codes she didn't understand and violence she didn't want to. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of stolen moments in places where no one would recognize him. He was drawn to her quiet competence, her life outside his world of blood and debt. She was drawn to the safety she felt in his lethal presence, a paradox that thrilled and terrified her. The wedding was a private ceremony with only his most trusted lieutenant and her own reflection as witnesses. She had insisted on keeping her own life, her own job. She wanted to be Imani, the executive secretary, not the wife of an underworld emperor. Now that life was gone, and all she had left was him. She pressed the call button. He answered on the first ring, his voice a low baritone that could soothe or shatter. Imani, he said her name differently than anyone else. It was not a question, but a statement. A claim. Tatsuya, she whispered, her voice breaking on his name. The tears she'd held back finally fell, hot and angry. They fired me. They framed me. There was a silence on the line, but it was not empty. It was the sound of a predator listening, gathering data. Where are you? She told him the name of the park. Don't move, he said. The line went dead. She didn't have to wait long. A black Lexus sedan, so clean it looked like a piece of polished obsidian, pulled up to the curb. The tinted windows slid down, and his driver, a man with a scar that bisected his eyebrow, nodded once. Imani got in, leaving the box of her old life on the bench. The interior of the car smelled of expensive leather and something else, something unique to Tatsuya. Cedarwood and smoke. He was in the back, looking at her, his dark eyes missing nothing. He wore a charcoal suit, the fabric a whisper of wealth, with a white shirt and no tie. The sleeves were rolled up just enough to reveal the intricate, swirling lines of ink that covered his forearms. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his gaze a physical touch. She took a shuddering breath and told him everything. The meeting, the tablet, Ren's smug face, the walk of shame through the office. She laid the ugly, humiliating details bare. When she finished, the car was gliding through the neon-drenched streets. Tatsuya remained silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked out the window at the city that was his territory, his empire. The company, he said finally, his voice dangerously soft. Kenkyo Tech. You liked working there. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation of a fact he already knew. He knew everything about her life, even the parts she kept from him. I did, she said, her voice small. I was building something. He turned his gaze back to her. The streetlights caught in his eyes, making them gleam. They took that from you. They dishonored you. Imani felt a surge of cold, righteous fury rise up to meet his. The grief was burning away, leaving something harder in its place. Yes. What do you want me to do? He asked. It was a simple question, but the weight of it was immense. He was offering her the full, terrifying scope of his power. He could make Run Tanaka disappear. He could ruin Mr. Davies. He could burn the entire company to the ground. The choice was hers. This was the moment everything changed. The moment she stopped being a civilian caught in his world and became a part of it. She met his gaze, unflinching. I want you to buy the company, she said, the words tasting like metal and power. And then I want you to ruin them. All of them. A slow, cold smile touched Tatsuya's lips. It did not reach his eyes. As you wish. He picked up his own phone and dialed a number. He spoke in rapid, quiet Japanese, his tone absolute. Orders were given. An empire was being set in motion. For her. That night, she did not go back to her small apartment. He took her to his home, a sprawling penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a skyscraper in Roppongi Hills. It was a world of floor-to-ceiling glass, minimalist furniture, and a silence so profound it felt sacred. It was less a home and more a fortress in the sky. He led her to a vast living area that overlooked the glittering expanse of Tokyo. The city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through her system. "My people are already moving," he said, his voice a low rumble beside her. "The financial analysts are dissecting Kenkyo Tech's portfolio. The others are looking into Ren Tanaka and this boss of yours, Davies. We will know everything about them by morning. Their debts, their shames, their weaknesses." She watched the relentless flow of traffic on the highways below. "Is it that easy for you?" "Nothing is easy," he corrected her gently. "It is merely inevitable. When I decide on a course of action." She took a sip of the whiskey. It burned, a welcome fire in her chest. For the first time all day, the knot in her stomach began to loosen. It was being replaced by something else, something darker and more exhilarating. Power. "Why?" she asked, turning to face him. "Why do all this for me?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a long time, he just studied her face, as if committing it to memory. "Some years ago," he began, his voice dropping lower, "I had a partner. A woman named Akemi. She was not my wife, but she was important. She managed the legitimate fronts for my organization. She was brilliant. A rival clan saw her as a weakness, a way to get to me. They used one of my own men, a man I trusted like a brother, to betray her. They took her. By the time I understood what had happened, it was too late. I failed to protect her." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with shame and old pain. This was his wound, the one vulnerability he carried. He was a man who built his life on control, on seeing 10 moves ahead, and he had failed the one person who had trusted him completely. "They used her honor against her," he continued, his eyes distant. "They used her trust in my organization against her. What happened to you today, it is a different stage, but the play is the same. A betrayal of trust. An attack on your honor. I will not allow that to happen again. Not to you." That was the moment she understood. He wasn't just avenging her lost job. He was fighting the ghosts of his past. He was protecting her in the way he had failed to protect Akemi. She wasn't just his wife. She was his chance at redemption. She made a choice then. She could have been horrified. She could have been scared of the darkness he was unleashing in her name. She could have walked away. But she didn't. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm, over the intricate ink. "Thank you," she whispered. He covered her hand with his own. His skin was warm, his grip firm. It was the first time he had ever shown her such an unguarded tenderness. It was small, almost deniable, but it was there. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the city that was about to become their battlefield. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in surgical destruction. Tatsuya's people moved with terrifying efficiency. They discovered that Ren Tanaka was not just ambitious, he was desperate. He had massive gambling debts owed to a minor, reckless Yakuza offshoot. He'd framed Imani to get a promotion and access to a higher level of data, which he planned to sell to pay them off. Mr. Davies, her former boss, was complicit. He had known about Ren's plan and had allowed it, promised a cut of the profits in exchange for his silence and cooperation. Tatsuya didn't just want to expose them. He wanted to dismantle them. He started with the money. Using a series of shell corporations, he initiated a hostile takeover bid for Kenkyo Tech, driving the stock price into a volatile frenzy. He bought up their debt, leveraging their financial weaknesses until the board was in a state of panic. While the corporate world reeled, his other soldiers went to work on the street. The minor clan that held Ren's debt was given a simple choice: swear loyalty to the Kudokai or be erased. They chose loyalty. Overnight, Ren's protectors became his captors. Imani watched it all unfold from the penthouse. She had a bank of monitors set up, tracking stock tickers, news reports, and internal communications from Tatsuya's men. She was no longer a spectator. She started pointing things out: vulnerabilities in Kenkyo's server security, the personal habits of key board members she'd observed as a secretary. Her intimate knowledge of the company's inner workings became a weapon. Tatsuya started consulting her, asking for her opinion on tactical decisions. He saw her intelligence, her quiet, methodical mind. He began to see her not as someone to protect, but as a partner. The danger, however, escalated. The remnants of the rival clan that had taken Akemi years ago were still active. They saw Tatsuya's bold, public move on Kenkyo Tech as a sign of distraction, of weakness. They saw Imani, the foreign woman at his side, as a repeat of history, an easy target. The first attempt came when she was in a car with Tatsuya's driver, heading to a secure location. A black van slammed into them at an intersection, a calculated, professional hit. Before the screech of metal had even faded, two men with guns were emerging from the van. Tatsuya's driver reacted instantly, shoving Imani down onto the floorboards and returning fire with a weapon that seemed to appear from nowhere. The car was a cocoon of chaos, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and shattered glass. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't scream. She did what she did best, she observed. The gunmen were focused on the driver. They hadn't seen her properly. She saw a briefcase on the seat. Tatsuya's driver was hit, a grunt of pain escaping his lips. Without thinking, Imani grabbed the heavy briefcase and, using all her strength, slammed it against the passenger door, popping it open. She scrambled out, low to the ground, using the wrecked car as cover. Her action created a diversion. One of the gunmen turned toward her, surprised. It was the only opening the driver needed. 2 precise shots, and the man fell. The other gunman, seeing his advantage lost, retreated to the van, which sped away. In the ringing silence that followed, Imani crawled back to the driver. He was bleeding from his arm, but his eyes were clear and sharp. They were full of a newfound respect. When Tatsuya arrived minutes later, his face was a mask of cold fury. He saw the blood, the bullet holes, and Imani, her hands shaking but her eyes blazing. He knelt before her, checking her for injuries with a desperate intensity that broke through his icy control. "I'm fine," she said, her voice hoarse. "He's hurt." Tatsuya's gaze flickered to his man, a silent order passing between them. Help was already on the way. His attention returned to her, his hands framing her face. "This is my fault," he breathed, the words raw with self-loathing. "I put you in this position." "No," she said, her voice firm. She met his gaze. "I chose this. I told you to do it." That night, the war changed. It was no longer just about business. It was about blood. Tatsuya went out himself, leaving Imani in the penthouse with a triple guard. She knew he was going to hunt, to retaliate, to finish what had been started all those years ago. Hours passed. The silence of the apartment was a living thing, pressing in on her. She paced the floor, the image of the gun, the sound of the crash, playing over and over in her mind. She almost lost him before she truly had him. The thought was unbearable. Just before dawn, he returned. He was unharmed, but there was a different kind of weariness on him, a darkness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He walked over to the bar and poured a drink. His hand was perfectly steady. "It's done," he said. "The threat is gone. Permanently." He didn't need to elaborate. She knew what that meant. This was her chance to run, to see the man he truly was, a killer, a monster, and to be repulsed. But she wasn't. She saw a man who carried the weight of an empire, who had gone into the dark to keep her safe. She walked over to him and took the glass from his hand, setting it down on the counter. She looked up at him, at this lethal, beautiful, broken man who was her husband. "I'm not Akemi," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "I'm not a weakness they can use against you. I'm your wife, and I am not leaving." This was her morally gray choice. She was not just accepting his world, she was claiming her place in it. A flicker of something, surprise, relief, something more, passed through his eyes. He reached out, his thumb tracing her jawline. The touch was electric. "You have a darkness in you I did not expect," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. She didn't flinch. You put it there. His eyes held hers, a silent, dangerous confession passing between them. He knew she was right. He had unlocked something in her, a capacity for ruthlessness she never knew she possessed. And he found it beautiful. The final piece of the plan fell into place the next day. The board of Kenkyo Tech, terrified and bleeding money, had called an emergency meeting to accept Tatsuya's takeover bid. But simply owning them wasn't enough. Imani wanted ruin. She remembered something, a private, off-the-books server Mr. Davies kept. He called it his insurance policy. She had seen him access it once, late at night. She knew its location in the building and had a good idea of the password protocol. It was a long shot, but it could hold the proof they needed to not just fire Davies and run, but to imprison them. I have to go in, she told Tatsuya. No, he said instantly. It's too dangerous. They're not looking for me, she argued. They're looking for your soldiers. They're expecting men with guns. They won't expect a former secretary walking in with a visitor's pass. I know the layout, the security blind spots. I can get to that server. He watched her, a war raging behind his eyes, the protector versus the strategist. The strategist won. He saw the cold, determined light in her eyes. She was no longer a civilian to be shielded. She was an asset. She was his queen. You will not go alone, he said finally. The plan was executed with surgical precision. Imani, dressed in a simple, elegant business suit, walked into the Kenkyo Tech building. She was a ghost from their past, unnoticed and underestimated. A few of Tatsuya's men, dressed as couriers and maintenance workers, entered at the same time, creating subtle diversions. She moved through the familiar halls, her heart a steady drum. This was her decisive act. She was not being rescued. She was taking back what was stolen from her. She reached Davies's office, unlocked the private server closet with a code she had memorized, and went to work. Within minutes, she had bypassed the encryption. And there it was. Everything. Not just the conspiracy to frame her, but years of insider trading, embezzlement, and blackmail. Davies hadn't just been complicit with Rin. He had been running his own criminal enterprise from his corner office. She downloaded everything onto a secure drive. As the progress bar hit 100%, the door opened. Rin stood there, his face pale with shock, which quickly curdled into rage. Behind him was Mr. Davies, his corporate mask finally gone, replaced by the face of a cornered rat. You, Davies hissed. You should not be here. Imani didn't flinch. She slipped the drive into her pocket. I came to collect my severance. Ain't long for here. But he never made it. A shadow detached itself from the doorway behind him. Tatsuya. He moved with impossible speed, a blur of controlled violence. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't need one. He neutralized Ren with a single, precise strike to his throat that left him gasping on the floor. Davies stared, frozen in terror, at the head of the Kudo-kai standing in his office. Tatsuya ignored him. He walked to Imani, his eyes only for her. Did you get it? She nodded, pulling the drive from her pocket. Everything. He took it from her, his fingers closing around hers for a moment. He turned his cold, flat gaze to Davies. You built your career on the illusion of power. You picked on a woman you thought was alone. You were mistaken. The aftermath was swift and total. The data from the drive was leaked anonymously to the financial authorities and the press. Kenkyo Tech imploded under the weight of the scandal. Davies and Run were arrested, their lives and careers irrevocably shattered. Tatsuya completed his acquisition of the company's smoldering remains for pennies on the dollar. A week later, Imani stood with him in what used to be Mr. Davies' office. The nameplate was gone. The desk cleared. The floor-to-ceiling window looked out over the vastness of Tokyo. Her city now. Tatsuya came to stand beside her, their reflections mirrored in the glass. He had paid a cost for this victory. He had exposed his organization to a level of public scrutiny he usually avoided. He had shed blood. But looking at Imani, he knew it was worth it. He didn't say, I love you. The words were too small, too simple for the vast, complex thing that had grown between them in the crucible of revenge. Instead, he looked at her reflection, at the woman who had faced down betrayal and violence and had not only survived, but thrived. "This is your empire now," he said, his voice a quiet vow. "As much as it is mine." It was not a proposal or a promise of a happy ending. It was an acknowledgement, a coronation. She had lost her quiet, ordinary life. She had crossed lines she could never uncross. But she had gained a throne. She looked at their reflections, the black woman from another world and the Japanese king of the underworld. She reached out, not for him, but to place her own hand on the cold glass of the window, as if claiming the city below. She had made her choice, and she would never look back.